from GC 90.7's Studio A on the campus of Gulf Coast State College. RAPLINE with Emily Balazs.
A personal struggle with PTSD. My guest today describes her time in Afghanistan as some of the worst moments of her life, but also some of the best moments of her military career. She's written a book all about it. It's called 166 Days, My Journey Through Darkness. My guest today is author Jennifer Clark, and she's going to tell us about her personal experience. She says anybody who's going through something, struggling to overcome something, can get something out of her book. And joining me today is Jennifer Clark. Thanks for coming by.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I've read your book, and I've been so excited to talk to you. And
Thank you.
First off, let me say thanks for your service.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
And I'm just really interested for you to let our listeners and viewers know about your personal journey.
Yeah, it's an exciting opportunity to really give people an inside look to some of the stuff that really happens overseas, and from a medical perspective, and also I think being the voice of a woman exposed to combat has just been a really unique opportunity for me to kind of be that voice for people.
And so now you're no longer with the military.
Correct.
You live here in Panama City. You're a physician assistant
with Vascular Associates, vascular practice here in town. Great organization, committed to changing lives in a positive way. So I'm honored and blessed to be there.
And your time in the military, of which you chronicled it in your book, you were a female member of a medical team with a group of special forces in Afghanistan. Wow.
Yeah, it was incredible. We were part of something called a female treatment team, which was just me and a female medic, and we were the only women attached to this team of Green Berets, and they sent us to really what was the most violent fire base in the time in Afghanistan to reach out to the women and children and the locals there to have a presence and provide medical care to a very underserved population of patients.
And with that, I have lots of questions for you, but to give everybody a true sense of where you're coming from, if you'd like to read a little bit of your book.
Sure, absolutely. I will just read the first chapter.
Okay.
It's called Who is This Woman? 6 December 2009. Tonight I realized I was in serious trouble. After 14 months of suppressing any emotion that reminded me of that horrible time, I finally reached the point of no return. I rolled over in bed, exhausted from the previous 2 sleepless nights. I looked up at my alarm clock and saw it was 12 a.m. My tiny newborn daughter was screaming in hunger from her bassinet at the foot of my bed. I dragged my tired body out of bed and picked up Ayla and cradled her in my arms. My new angel was such an amazing little person already, and I was so grateful to have her in my life. She was my whole world. My love for her was incredible. I knew this love would make all the hurt I was trying so desperately not to feel go away. It had to. I had come to where I didn't know what else to do to avoid going there, and she had become my reason to move on. I wanted to do everything by the books and be the best mom I could for her, so I was adamant about breastfeeding. She was born 3 weeks early, and we'd struggled with this in the hospital, but I was determined. I sat down with her in my bed and began to try to feed her. She continued to cry. Okay, Jen, be patient. You can do this, I told myself. Remember the different methods they taught you in the hospital. I thought about the endless piles of paperwork they gave me when they discharged us 2 days before and tried to use the recommendations. Unfortunately, I had no luck. Her screams became louder. I have to do this, I thought. Why can't she just do what the books say? I felt my emotions bubbling under the surface, a situation that had become such a norm for me over the last several months since I returned from Afghanistan. I had mastered the art of avoidance, keeping all of my pain at arm's length by dodging anything that reminded me of what I had been through. Now she was screaming. Oh my God, I don't know what the hell to do. I was losing my composure. I looked at the clock again, 2 a.m. 2 hours had disappeared into the night, and I was still in the same place I was when we started. Her screams became louder, and her little voice was becoming hoarse. My physician assistant instincts kicked in. What if she's dehydrated, I thought. I reached down and put my finger on her tongue. It was dry. Oh my God, she is. I looked down at her with concern, but I didn't see Ayla. I was holding that baby, the dying baby in Afghanistan. Her brother had carried her into my clinic in what looked like a potato sack draped over his shoulder, plopped her down on my gurney, and untied his sack. I looked inside and saw the skin and bones of what used to be a healthy baby girl, now minutes from death. There was nothing that I could do to save her. As I looked down at my daughter, I was right back there in that horrible place. I could smell the filth in the air, and I could hear the breath slowly leaving the baby girl's tiny dying body. I snapped. "Greg, wake up!" I screamed at my husband as he lay next to me, completely oblivious to my rapid descent into panic. "What is it, Jen? What's wrong? Is Ayla okay?" He jumped out of bed, braced for the worst. "She's starving. I can't feed her. She's dehydrated. Just look at her," I screamed. "Calm down, sweetie. It's okay," he tried. "No, it's not okay. Please, do something. Please, Greg, go to the store and buy some formula. Just look at her," I pleaded. "She's okay. Don't worry. Remember, they gave us some samples at the hospital. I'll go fix a bottle." He rushed to the kitchen and returned shortly with a bottle in hand. "Here, I'll take her," he said. And finally, our screaming baby was content. Alone in bed, I began to cry. I realized what had just happened. My first flashback. This thing was real. I was not okay. I was damaged goods, and I didn't know how to fix it. I knew the deployment would change me, but I had no idea that this is what would come back from it. Who had I become? The once joyful, funny, optimistic person who had everything under control was lost and nowhere to be found. Instead, this damaged emotional wreck had taken over. I thought about Ayla. Her name had been predetermined for many years. Ayla, after a strong female character in the novel Clan of the Cave Bear that was passed down through the generations of women in my family. The story illustrated a young lady who, despite all odds, grew into an amazing woman of strength and character. Her middle name, Lee, was in honor of my grandmother, who was such an influence for me growing up. I had thought I was going to be that strong influence for my daughter, but now I had no idea who I was anymore. My little girl would never know who I once had been. I knew the deployment would be a major part of my life, so I kept a journal to document that time in my life for my future children. Now that child was here. What would she think of her mother? How had I come to this point? I thought of the journal. It held the key to who I was and who I had become. It was a story of how my life changed forever due to the most traumatic experience I had ever endured. That night I knew what I had to do. I had to relive it in its entirety if I had any hope of rescuing the lost soul inside of me.
And that is words there from author Jennifer Clark from her book, 166 Days, My Journey Through Darkness. And she is our guest today on RAPLINE. Jennifer, what was it like being a woman in Afghanistan with a bunch of Special Forces guys?
Crazy. At first I was extremely intimidated by that. I felt like I was going to be judged from the minute I stepped off the helicopter. And in all fairness, I think I was a little bit, when they saw me and they're like, oh, who's this girl? What's she going to be about? But very soon after I joined the team, they embraced myself and Becky, the medic who was with me, and they really became like brothers to us. They took such good care of us, and if there's ever anybody, who looked at us in the wrong way, we had some incredible guys on the team that just, wouldn't stand for any of that. They were just very honorable, and they were very supportive of us, and they were understanding of us not really having a whole lot of exposure to what they did, and they did a good job of embracing us and trying to, help us through some of that stuff.
And so that environment that you were in and seeing everything that you saw, how did that impact you?
Very, very substantially. I felt like I really just lost my innocence over there. There were some incredible moments, like you mentioned earlier. I had some incredible moments in my career, saw things that I read in books, and in school, they told me, you're never going to see this. This just doesn't happen anymore. And I had an opportunity to treat patients with some of these conditions that we just don't have in the States. But the violence and just the realities of war that I was exposed to just, were heart-wrenching, and it really did impact me.
And so what would you say was one of your hardest moments in Afghanistan?
There were so many, but I think September 2nd was a day that I will never, ever forget, and it was a day a very good friend of mine was killed in combat. And having to deal with his death on top of actually taking care of a mass casualty of 13 people who were injured in that battle was incredibly painful, and it really did change me from that moment on through the rest of the deployment and afterwards when I came home.
And so you say that this book is for anybody who's struggling through anything and kind of needs that helping hand. So how would you describe your struggle with PTSD?
You know, I think I was really in denial when I came home. And of course, you know, after that experience, I really shut down while I was still there, and then I came home, and I think there was a lot of the newness and excitement of being back with my husband and, you know, my stepson, and just being so relieved to be back in the safety of the United States and having that new perspective of what we really do have here in America. But over time, that really did start to weigh on me, and I started to notice that I just I felt like a shell of who I really was in my core, and I really started to have a lot of the emotions that are tied with PTSD. And I'm a very happy, optimistic person, and to feel such negative hurt and hate and rage and fear and all of those negative emotions really was very hard. But I didn't want to face that. And so for a very long time, I was actually in denial. And especially, I think, being a healthcare provider, I felt obligated to not have to admit that I had that, because I'm the one who helps people. I'm the one who tells people how to get through those things, and now I'm one of them who's suffering from it too. It was a really hard pill to swallow.
And so when you came back to the States and you're stationed at Tyndall Air Force Base and you're back on base working and you're struggling with these thoughts, and a friend or coworker is who you turn to.
Yeah, you know, that night that I just read about with my daughter, that was really an eye-opener for me, because all of a sudden it wasn't about me anymore. You know, I had this little girl who was depending on me to be her mom, and I knew I really had to do something at that point. And I'd kind of tossed around the idea of going and talking to somebody kind of informally before that, but I really just, that night I knew it. And I actually was at work a couple of days after that, and I was in the middle of clinic, and my commander came down, and she had another tasking for me. And it was, my daughter was, I think, 8 weeks old, actually, when I was in clinic, so I guess it was a little bit further down. She came and gave me this tasking that said I was going to be going back to Afghanistan in a very similar role for a year. And I really couldn't handle that, and it was, I'm ashamed to admit that my mind didn't even go to the fact that I would be leaving my daughter. My mind went to, I can't go back to Afghanistan. And so that day I went over and I got help and started the whole process of recovery.
And so where are you today with your recovery?
Amazing. I am so happy to say that I'm through the PTSD, and I'm better because of it. And I think that's the importance of why I wrote this book, why I'm talking to people on a regular basis about my story, because I found the purpose in it, and I found I guess that resilience in myself, that I've been able to come through and find the reason why that happened to me, and how the story is so much bigger than me, and it's a way for me to hopefully inspire others who've been through anything traumatic in their lives, that they can get through it and find the purpose in those things.
Well, of course, as you wrote in your book, there were many horrible, awful moments, but there were some funny moments too, and one of those that I wish you talk about a little bit is when one of the people in the village presented you with a live chicken.
Yes. So we went out on a mission, and it was called a MedCap, and our job was to basically provide just kind of routine medical care to people in the field with just some of the most common things like aches and pains and, dehydration and malnutrition. And so we went to this one compound, and, it was heartbreaking to see the kids. They didn't have shoes. They've never seen a toothbrush before. So we were giving them these just things that are just a standard kind of part of our day-to-day in America, and it was like Christmas for them. I mean, they were so excited and they were so happy, and we spent a good part of the day with them. And so at the end of that mission, the village elder kind of translated through the interpreter that he wanted to give me something to thank us for what we did. And that was a huge deal, of course, because, being a woman in Afghanistan, women were not highly thought of at all. And so for him to want to give me something in gratitude was really important and just overwhelming, and just really, I was honored. And so he went back and he wanted to give me his most prized possession that he could, and it turned out to be this chicken. And it was a very sweet moment when he and of course Becky, the medic that was with me, was scared, and she's like, I am not touching that thing. Lord knows what's on it and all that stuff, but there was absolutely no way I couldn't accept it, and so I did, and I was very grateful. And the funny part about it was, it wasn't like a moment where, it was like, thanks for the chicken and we left. It was, hey, we still got to be here for about 30 minutes. So I had to just kind of stand there with this chicken, and, it's struggling in my arms, and it's, pooping on the ground and stuff. But it was a really sweet moment. One of the moments that I will cherish for the rest of my life.
You are watching and listening to RAPLINE on GC 90.7 FM and GC TV. My guest today is author Jennifer Clark, and her book is called 166 Days, My Journey Through Darkness. So that journey through darkness, what helped carry you through that journey, your deployment?
I think that there was two really important things. One, I think I have a close relationship with God, and I think that having that to kind of lean back on was a big deal for me through the entire thing and then after. But I think also my husband, my best friend in the world, and I do think it's relayed I hope it is relayed pretty well in the book, how much he means to me and the friendship that we had and what he did for me when I was there, and then as I came through the deployment and then home, how he had to really endure a lot of my struggle with the PTSD, and how he stayed with me and was such a tremendous support for me throughout that whole process. And without him, I certainly don't think I would have come through it nearly as well as I did.
So what's the biggest thing you took from your journey?
I think the biggest thing I took from the entire experience is that, life is bigger than us, and I think we kind of get so caught up with trying to control everything in our lives, with all of the responsibilities and the obligations that we have with our day-to-day, with work and family, and our goals that we set and all of those things. We almost kind of get this false sense of control. And so when I was over there and went through some of the things that I did, I really did realize that is much bigger than me. And when I went through the PTSD and hitting rock bottom with that, I realized because of that, I had no control of the circumstances that happened to me, but I did get to control what I did with it, and I realized I had a choice. And I think that's so important with life in general, regardless of whether you've been through something like I did in the military, or a traumatic event happens with you and your family, or you've got some horrible medical diagnosis, or you're laid off from work, or whatever circumstances in our life that happen that we don't understand and they seem unfair. There's a bigger reason for that, but we get to decide what we do with that, and how we move forward and who we become because of that. And that's where I feel my impact has been so important because I have such a positive outlook on it. And I'm not the only person with a story like that. I mean, you look at people who, you know, have had these things happen in their lives, and I watch Iron Man, that show about, you know, people who just go and compete in the Ironman triathlon, and the stories of the people that compete in that is just incredible. They've been diagnosed with, you know, stage 4 cancer, and they're dying, and so they go out and they do this for a purpose, or they do it in honor of somebody else, or people who do things because of the lives that were lost in 9/11, or the lives that are continuing to be lost overseas. And you just, when you can find that higher purpose in life and realize that you have such a tremendous impact on what happens in your life from that point, is pretty cool. And so that's, I think, the biggest thing I took from it.
So when you were in Afghanistan, as we mentioned, you were with a team of Special Forces men, but you also had another female medic that worked with you, Becky, who became a very dear friend.
Oh my gosh, she's like a sister to me. I just think the world of her, and you know, I'm so sad that we haven't had a chance to actually reunite physically since the deployment, because she got stationed in Germany relatively quickly after, you know, she got back, but we still talk on a pretty regular basis, and especially initially after we came back. We would, you know, end up talking in the middle of the night when we were having a rough time, kind of going back and having some issues with dealing with the emotions that we were feeling from it. And so we've been each other's crutch through the whole thing. And, you know, she's like family to me, and I would do anything for her. And I'm very much looking forward to the day we can meet again. So,
now, talk about some of the treatments that the locals were using, because as you mentioned, they didn't have access to what we think of as just day-to-day, you know, medical care. One thing you mentioned in your book is a treatment that some people use made of hair and egg.
Yes, that was, so they had what was called a bazaar doctor. The bazaar is kind of the local market there, where they would go and trade goods and you know, purchase things. And they had a doctor that, you know, would practice medicine, and they would do just a lot of different methods. And I'll never forget the first time I was really exposed to one of those with the hair and the egg was when I treated a 15-year-old guy who had gotten in a motorcycle accident, and he had a really, really bad fracture to both of the bones in his lower leg, and he would have been a surgical patient here in the States, and he had the accident 3 days before he came to see me. And when he came to the clinic, I saw that he had this kind of blue cloth wrapped around his leg with these twigs on, you know, the sides of it that were about the diameter of a pencil as kind of a brace. And as I opened it up, I saw right underneath the cloth was just this hair, and underneath that was egg. And the hair and the egg had these medicinal properties, you know, according to what their culture showed, and that was what they were doing to help him. And it was very interesting to kind of deal with that. And I saw it a couple other times too with some other patients, but it was it didn't smell very good. And, but trying to be respectful of that too, as I'm, you know, trying to practice, you know, the medicine that I was taught, and explain to them why and all of that stuff. But it was definitely an interesting exposure for me.
So also, if you would touch on a little bit about, you know, we just take things for granted so much here in the States, and I know you used a homemade hammock for many things over there, and you were very happy to have it.
Yeah, they one of the missions that I went out on was another one of those med caps, and it was actually one that we were required to stay overnight. And so I'll never forget, as we were kind of getting ready to go out on the mission, I saw one of the team guys like cutting up this parachute, and he was very methodical with what he was doing. And I, you know, kind of just stood and I was looking at him, and I finally asked what he was doing. He's like, "I'm making a hammock. You know, I don't want to sleep on that ground." And I I didn't either, with the scorpions and the camel spiders and all of that stuff. And it was pretty scary being out in the field in that area. And so he was very gracious and took me under his wing and helped me, you know, make my hammock. And so that night I actually tied it in between the two Humvees, and that's how I slept. And that hammock turned into a lifesaver through the rest of that mission. I mean, we used it for shade. We used it. The girl that was with me on that particular mission, you know, there wasn't a bathroom for us to go to, and it actually became our bathroom door. And so, you know, we got very creative with using a parachute, and it definitely gave me a new perspective and appreciation for the things, the niceties that we have.
So where can people get your book?
Well, it's available on Amazon, and there's a Kindle edition as well as the hardback. It's also on barnesandnoble.com. And I do also have a website. If people wanted to get a signed copy, I can send them a signed copy directly from that website. And it's backtocenterwellness.com. And there's a tab on there for the bookstore. And it's backtocenterwellness.com/bookstore/, and that would go directly to the place where you can purchase either an ebook or the hardcover, and I can send a signed copy.
Okay, and with that, we're running out of time, but I did want to give you an opportunity for any final thoughts that you want to get out.
You know, just that I'm really honored to be the voice of so many other people who have struggled with such horrible circumstances, again, whether it be, you know, with military service or just any other traumatic event. And the fact that I get to be that voice to hopefully make a difference for people is just such an honor and a privilege, and I just am very blessed, and I hope that this message of hope can spread as far as possible to make the impact that I feel it could. So.
Well, Jennifer, thanks so much for coming by, and again, thank you for your service.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that is a wrap for this edition of RAPLINE. Thanks again to my guest author, Jennifer Clark. RAPLINE, of course, a service of Gulf Coast State College and GC 90.7 FM. And remember, if you're looking to add a pet to your family, don't forget the adoption option. I'm Emily Balazs. Have a great day.